The air in Redemption Gulch, Arizona territory wasn't just dust. It was judgment. A fine, gritty powder that settled on everything from a good man's hat to the soul of a sinner. In the summer of 1881, that dust was thick with whispers. They were about me, Ruby Hayes, the doctor's daughter from Boston, with hands too clean for the sun-scorched earth. But more than that, they were about him, the Apache they called the Giant, a man whose silence was louder than any gunshot, and whose eyes held the memory of 1,000 desert sunsets. Our story wasn't about cowboys and Indians. It was about a chasm between worlds and the desperate, dangerous attempt to build a bridge. My arrival in Redemption Gulch wasn't a grand entrance, but more a quiet surrender. I had fled the suffocating parlors of Boston society, where a woman's sharp mind was considered a sharper failing. My father, Doc Harper, had brought his failing lungs and his headstrong daughter to this ragged edge of civilization, hoping the dry air would grant him a few more years. He set up a small practice, and I, his overeducated apprentice, became the town's unofficial nurse, midwife, and setter of bones. Redemption. Gulch was a town held together by desperation and whiskey. It was ruled by a man named Gus Ford, a rancher whose vast holdings were matched only by his bottomless ambition. He had a politician's smile that never reached his cold, calculating eyes. For my first week, he made his intentions clear, calling on my father with gifts of beef and bottles of French wine, his gaze lingering on me with an unnerving sense of ownership. He saw me as another prize to be acquired, just a polished piece of the East to adorn his Western empire. The townsfolk were wary of me. I read books, spoke my mind, and didn't flutter my eyelashes when a man tipped his hat. I was an oddity, but they needed my hands. I stitched up knife wounds for drunken prospectors, delivered babies in stifling one-room shacks, and set the leg of Buck Malone's own son after a fall from a hayloft. I earned a grudging respect, a currency more valuable than gold in that town. I first saw the man they called the Giant a month after my arrival. A freight wagon had overturned on the main street, crushing the driver's leg. As my father and I worked, a hush fell over the small crowd that had gathered. I looked up from the bloody mess of denim on bone and saw him. He wasn't just tall. He was monumental. He stood a head and shoulders above any man there, with a chest so broad it strained the seams of his simple cotton shirt. His hair was long and black as a raven's wing, held back by a thin leather band. But it was his face that silenced the crowd. It was a mask of hard angles and weathered bronze, dominated by a jaw that could have been carved from the surrounding mesas. His eyes, dark and deep-set, missed nothing. He was an Apache, plain to see, but he moved with a stillness that was entirely his own. He wasn't armed, at least, not visibly. Yet he radiated a danger more potent than any holstered Colt. He said nothing. He simply watched, his gaze fixed on my hands as I cleaned the wound and prepared a splint. The other townsfolk gave him a wide berth, their fear and hatred, a palpable thing in the oppressive heat. Gus Ford, who had been observing from the porch of his land office, stepped forward. "That's far enough, savage," Ford said, his voice dripping with casual contempt. The Apache's eyes flickered to Ford for a brief second, a glance so dismissive it was more insulting than any retort. Then his gaze returned to me. He held it for a long moment, an unreadable expression on his face, before he turned and walked away, melting back into the shimmering heat haze at the edge of town as silently as he had appeared. "Who was that?" I asked my father later, my voice quiet. "The locals call him Rohn," he replied, wiping sweat from his brow. "It means giant in their tongue or something close to it. His Chiricahua Apache lives alone up in the Dragoons. He comes to town for supplies now and then. Trades pelts. Never says a word, never causes a lick of trouble, but folks fear him all the same." My father paused, looking at me. "Gus Ford lost a brother in an Apache raid years ago. He holds a special kind of hate for them. Steer clear of that man, Ruby. Both of them." I tried to heed his advice, but Rohn became a silent fixture in my new life. I'd see him at the edge of town, a solitary figure, watching the world go by. Once I saw him at the general store trading a perfectly cured fox pelt with the owner, Jesse Cole. Rohn didn't speak. He simply pointed at sacks of flour, coffee, and salt. The transaction was conducted in complete silence, a tense pantomime of commerce between two worlds. I noticed the way his hands moved, large, calloused, but with a surprising grace. He promised me a life of luxury and safety. "A woman like you," he'd say, "a delicate flower shouldn't be battling this wasteland. You belong in a proper home." My home. His words felt like a gilded cage. He didn't see me. He saw only a symbol. The more he pushed, the more my gaze drifted towards the distant mountains where the silent Apache lived, a man who stood for everything Gus Ford sought to crush: freedom, wildness, and existence untethered to greed. I didn't know then that the weight of Rohn's silence would soon be nothing compared to the weight of the words he would one day speak. As summer deepened, the land baked under the unforgiving sun. The heat brought illness. A wave of scarlet fever swept through the miners' camps and then into the town itself. It hit the children hardest. For 2 weeks, my father and I barely slept, moving from one grief-stricken home to the next. Our remedies and cool cloths felt like pitiful gestures against the relentless march of the disease. We lost 3 children in town, including the baker's youngest daughter. The church bell tolled, each clang like a lead weight on the town's heart. One evening, as I was leaving Lottie Reed's household, their little boy finally passed the crisis point. A figure blocked my path. It was a young Apache boy, no older than 10, his face streaked with dust and tears. He spoke in a rush of panicked Apache words, pointing frantically back toward the mountains. I couldn't understand him, but I saw the terror in his eyes. Before I could think, another shadow emerged from the twilight. It was Rohn. No longer the silent observer, he moved with a purpose that was swift and commanding. He stood before me, his sheer size blocking out the last of the dying sun. "My sister's son," he said, his voice the first time I had heard it. It was a low baritone, a deep, resonant sound, like stones rolling in a riverbed. It held no accent I could place, just a careful, precise articulation of English that was startling in its clarity. "He has the burning sickness. The shaman's prayers do no good. His mother, she is afraid." The townsfolk on the street had stopped watching. I could feel their eyes on my back, a mixture of fear and suspicion. To them, I was crossing a line that wasn't meant to be crossed. Helping an Apache was one step shy of treason. "I am a doctor's daughter, not a miracle worker," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "I can try, but I make no promises." "Trying is more than the spirits have offered," he replied. His gaze was intense, searching my face for something: pity, revelation, perhaps courage. "I will pay." "I don't want your money or your pelts," I said, meeting his eyes. "I want you to understand that what I have may not be enough." He gave a sharp nod and turned to the boy, speaking a few soft words in their language, a sound of gentle reassurance. Then he looked back at me. "My horse is here. We must go now. The fever is high." I didn't hesitate. I ran back to Doc Harper's surgery, grabbing my medical bag, stuffing it with quinine and clean linens. My father stood in the doorway, his face etched with worry. "Ruby, this is foolish," he whispered. "These people, they are not our people. If that child dies in your care, then he dies." I cut him off, my voice sharp. "But if I don't go, he dies for certain. Isn't that what you taught me? That sickness knows no creed or color." He sighed, the sound of a man who knew he'd lost the argument, the moment he raised me to have a mind of my own. He handed me a small canteen. "Be careful, daughter." The ride into the Dragoon Mountains was terrifying and exhilarating. Rohn rode a powerful buckskin stallion with the easy grace of a man born in the saddle. I rode behind him, my hands resting tentatively on his shoulders. The world of redemption. Gulch, with its dusty streets and narrow mines, fell away behind us, replaced by a sprawling canvas of rock and cactus, bathed in the ethereal glow of a rising moon. We rode in silence, the only sounds the rhythmic beat of hooves and the whisper of the night wind. His people were hidden in a small, sheltered canyon, a place the earth itself seemed to protect. It was a small band, perhaps 30 souls in all. Their faces, illuminated by the flickering firelight, were masks of fear and distrust as I, the white woman, was led into their midst. The sick child was in a small wickiup, a brush shelter. His mother, a woman with eyes hollowed out by grief, looked at me with open hostility, but Rohn spoke to her in their language, his tone firm but gentle, and she reluctantly stepped aside. The boy was burning. His skin was flush with a rash, his breathing ragged and shallow. I worked for hours, forcing sips of willow bark tea and water between his cracked lips, sponging his body with cool, damp cloths. Rohn never left my side. He translated my instructions, held the boy's thrashing limbs, and watched my every move with an unnerving focus. In the quiet moments as the child slept fitfully, we spoke. I asked him about his flawless English. A man of God found me. After a raid, he said, his eyes fixed on the fire. My family's gone. He took me to a mission in Santa Fe, taught me his words, his books. He wanted to save my soul. And did he? I asked softly, a flicker of a sad smile touching his lips. He showed me a new world, he replied, his gaze turning distant. But my soul was never lost. It was waiting for me, here in these mountains. I came back. The white man's world has many books, but no answers for a man like me. I learned his Apache name was Rohn, but his mission name had been Joseph. He was a man caught between two worlds, belonging fully to neither. He had read Shakespeare and the Bible, yet he knew the language of the hawk and the deer. He was a warrior, a leader to his small displaced band, and a scholar in a world that wanted him dead or assimilated. For 3 days and nights, I stayed in that canyon, battling the fever for the life of a child whose name I couldn't pronounce. On the 3rd morning, the fever broke. The boy woke weak but lucid and asked for water. A collective sigh of relief passed through the camp. His mother fell to her knees, tears of gratitude streaming down her face as she clutched my hand. Rohn walked with me to the edge of the canyon as the sun began its ascent, painting the sky in hues of rose and gold. You have a strong spirit, Ruby. Hayes, he said, his voice low. It is not a thing I have seen in your people. And you have a gentle heart, I replied. It is not what the people in town would have me believe. He looked out at the vast, wild expanse before us. They believe what they need to believe. It makes their world simple, black and white, good and evil. But the world is not simple. It is the color of the sky, 1,000 shades mixed together, and you can never find where one begins and the other ends. As I prepared to leave, he pressed a small, intricately beaded pouch into my hand. For you. So you remember the people of the canyon. I won't forget, I promised. As I rode back toward Redemption Gulch, I knew something profound had shifted within me. I had gone into the mountains to fight a fever in a child's blood, but I had returned with a different kind of fever of my own. My return to Redemption Gulch was met with chilling silence. The whispers that had followed me before now became a wall of open hostility. By saving an Apache child, I had betrayed my own kind. Jesse Cole, the store owner, suddenly found his supply of bandages had run out. Lottie Reed, whose baby I had delivered just months before, crossed the street to avoid me. The lines Rohn had spoken of, black and white, good and evil, had been drawn in the dust, and I had defiantly stepped over them. Buck Malone, a man whose spine seemed to be on permanent loan to Gus Ford, paid my father a visit. He was polite, but his message was clear. Folks are spooked, Doc, he said, twisting the brim of his hat. They see Ruby consorting with the savages. It stirs up bad memories. For their safety and hers, it might be best if she keeps to the clinic. It was a warning dressed up as advice. Gus Ford, however, saw an opportunity. He arrived at our doorstep that evening, not with threats, but with a bouquet of desert wildflowers that looked garish and out of place in his meaty fist. "Ruby," he began, his voice smooth as oiled leather, "you have a charitable heart. I admire that. But your heart is leading you into danger." He stepped inside his presence, filling our small parlor. "You need protection. This is a hard land, and it has no place for a woman alone, especially one who invites the wrong kind of attention." He set the flowers down and turned to me, his eyes gleaming with a predatory sincerity. "Marry me. I can give you everything. A fine house, respect, security. The town will follow my lead. They'll forget all about this foolishness with the Apache. I will make them." It was the devil's bargain. He was offering to quell the storm he himself was fanning. He would give me safety in exchange for my soul. "Thank you for the offer, Mr. Ford," I said, my voice cold as a winter morning. "But I am not in need of a protector, and I am not for sale." A flicker of fury crossed his face before being replaced by his customary smirk. "A spirited woman. I like that, but spirit doesn't stop a bullet. Ruby, you're to on a rope. Think about my offer. It won't last forever," Gus Ford said as he left. The air in the room felt lighter, but his threat lingered like the smell of sulfur, heavy and stifling. The pressure mounted. One of Ford's ranch hands, a brutish man named Roy Dobson, spooked my horse one day, nearly sending me tumbling into the street. Then one night, a rock was thrown through our window wrapped in a note that simply read, "Indian lover." My father's health worsened. The dry air and stress gnawed at his lungs, his coughing fits growing more violent. His eyes filled with fear for me. I began taking long walks at dusk, seeking refuge in the desert's vast emptiness, the only place where I didn't feel judged. It was during one of these walks near an old mission ruin that Rohn found me. He moved so quietly, I didn't even hear him approach. It was as if he had materialized from the shadows of the evening. "The town is turning against you," he stated. It wasn't a question. "They are afraid," I replied, not looking at him. "And Gus Ford is feeding their fear. Ford is a snake who sheds his skin to fit the season," Rohn said. He paused, his gaze distant. "I know his kind. He uses fear like a cattle prod." He was silent for a moment. "My people are grateful. They ask about you. The boy Kai is strong." Again, he continued. "He tells everyone the white medicine woman has magic." I allowed myself a small smile. "There's no magic, just science and luck," I replied. "But to them it's the same thing. You should not be here. It's not safe," Rohn said, his voice low. "Nowhere is safe." I shot back, the frustration of the past weeks boiling over. In Boston, I suffocated in a gilded cage. Here I'm a pariah. It seems a woman's only choices are which prison she'll accept. He stepped closer and I could feel the heat radiating from him. He reached out, not to touch me, but his hand hovered near my arm, a gesture of unspoken comfort. "There's another choice," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "But it's a hard path, a path between the worlds." Our clandestine meetings became my only solace. We would meet at the ruins, or by a hidden spring deep in a rocky arroyo. He told me of the Apache ways, the spirits of the mountains, and the wisdom of the coyote. I told him of Boston, of symphonies and museums, a world so foreign to him it might as well have been on the moon. We were two lonely souls, each in exile in our own way, finding a temporary home in the space between us, but we were not as secret as we believed. One evening, as I rode back into town, Roy Dobson, Jake Carter, and Sam O'Neill blocked my path. "Evening, Miss Hayes." Roy sneered, his tobacco-stained teeth gleaming in the moonlight. "Out for a ride, or were you visiting your red-skinned beau?" My heart hammered against my ribs. "Let me pass," I said, my voice tight. "Mr. Ford doesn't like you wandering so far from home." He grabbed my horse's bridle. He's a jealous man, and he especially doesn't like his property sniffed around by some reservation dog. Suddenly a voice cut through the darkness, low, lethal. "Let her go!" Rohn stepped out from behind a cluster of boulders, holding a long-bladed knife. In the moonlight, He looked like a vengeful spirit risen from the earth. The three ranch hands, braver with whiskey in their bellies, froze their arrogance, evaporating in the face of the silent, deadly giant. "This ain't your business, Apache," Roy stammered, his hand inching toward his pistol. "She is my business." Rohn said each word like ice. "Touch her again and your boss will be short a foreman." The menace in his voice was absolute. Roy and his men exchanged nervous glances, then slowly backed away, melting into the night. Rohn turned to me, his face a grim mask. The danger had passed, but a new, more complicated tension hung between us. "He will not stop," Rohn said. "Ford will see this as a challenge. He will try to destroy me, to possess you. What can we do?" I asked, my voice trembling. He looked at me, and in his eyes I saw a storm of conflict, a battle between his protective instincts and the harsh reality of his world. "For now," he said, "you must be brave, and I must be wise." He escorted me to the edge of town, a silent guardian in the darkness. But we both knew this was just the beginning. Gus Ford had been defied. He was a man who never forgave a slight, and he had just been given the perfect excuse to unleash all his hatred. He would no longer try to buy me with flowers. He would try to win me with blood. Gus Ford's retaliation was not swift and bloody, but slow and cruel like poison. He started by choking our supplies. The freight company, which he conveniently owned a majority stake in, suddenly had trouble delivering my father's medical orders from back east. Jesse Cole's general store was perpetually out of stock of the things we needed most. Ford was isolating us, trying to starve us out to make life so unbearable that his offer of marriage would seem like a salvation. My father grew weaker, the stress eating away at him, and his coughing fits left him breathless and pale. He watched me with haunted eyes, torn between pride in my defiance and terror for my future. "He will break us, Ruby," he whispered one night, his voice a ragged sigh. "He will not." I vowed, though my own resolve was fraying. The weight of it all was becoming unbearable. The town scorned my father's decline and Ford's ever-present threat. My secret meetings with Rohn were the only moments I could breathe. They became a dangerous balm for my soul. One night, the air was thick with the promise of a storm. The sky had turned a bruised purple and the wind moaned through the canyons. I met Rohn at our usual spot by the mission ruins. He was more tense than I had ever seen him. His usual stoic calm had been replaced by a restless energy. "Ford is moving against my people," he said without preamble. "He's accused us of rustling his cattle. It's a lie, a pretext. Buck Malone has a warrant to search our camp. They'll use it as an excuse, too." I couldn't finish the sentence. "To kill us." Rohn finished for me, his voice flat. "To clear the land. It's an old story. The white man wants the land, so he creates a monster to slay. This time I am the monster." Fear, cold and sharp, pierced through me. "You have to run. Take your people and go north." "Run where?" he asked, a bitter edge to his voice. "This is our home. These mountains have been the home of my ancestors for 1,000 years. There is nowhere left to run. Soon there will be an ocean on every side." He turned to face me, the rising wind whipping his long hair across his face. "I will not run. We will fight and we will die on the land that is ours." The finality in his voice terrified me. This wasn't a problem I could solve with medicine or logic. This was a clash of worlds, and he was standing on the fault line. "There has to be another way," I pleaded, stepping closer to him. "Don't do this. Don't let him make you a martyr." "It is better to be a martyr for your people than a dog in a cage," he said fiercely. Then his expression softened. The anger in his eyes was replaced by profound sadness. He looked at me, really looked at me, as if he were trying to memorize my face. "Ruby Hayes," he said, his voice dropping to a low, intimate murmur, nearly lost in the wind. "From the first moment I saw you with blood on your hands and no fear in your eyes, I saw your spirit. You do not belong in his world of cages." He reached out and gently touched my cheek. His hand was rough and calloused, but his touch was surprisingly tender. It sent a shiver through me, one that had nothing to do with the cold wind. "I have walked a lonely path," he continued, his thumb tracing the line of my jaw. "I have read your people's books about love. I thought it was just a word, a pretty lie told in a language I understood but could not feel. I was wrong." Tears pricked my eyes as the storm inside me finally broke. All the fear, the frustration, the loneliness, and this new, terrifying, wonderful emotion coalesced into a single aching point in my chest. "Rohn," I whispered, my voice choked. He moved closer, his towering frame shielding me from the wind. His dark eyes held mine, and in their depths I saw a raw, heartbreaking vulnerability. He was a man of deep silences and few words, but the words he chose now were weighted with the power of a lifetime of unspoken feelings. "My life may be short," he said, his voice thick with an emotion I couldn't name. "Tomorrow I may be a ghost that haunts these mountains. I have nothing to offer you. No fine house, no safety, no future that is not stained with blood. But I will say this here in this moment." He leaned in his forehead, resting against mine. I could feel his breath on my lips, warm and alive. "I want to be the first man you kiss," he whispered, his voice trembling with the force of his declaration, "and the last man you love." The world seemed to stop. The wind died. The impending storm held its breath. It was the most beautiful, most tragic, most profound thing anyone had ever said to me. It was a promise and a eulogy all at once. It asked for everything and offered nothing but the absolute truth of his heart. I didn't answer with words. I rose on my toes, looped my arms around his strong neck, and pressed my lips to his. The kiss was not gentle. It was desperate, hungry. A collision of two worlds fueled by borrowed time and the certainty of loss. It tasted of the desert dust and wind, and a deep, aching sorrow. It was a kiss of firsts and lasts, of hellos and goodbyes. In that moment, I wasn't the doctor's daughter from Boston, and he wasn't the feared Apache warrior. We were just a man and a woman, clinging to each other on the edge of an abyss, finding a fleeting, perfect eternity in the heart of a storm. When we finally broke apart, breathless and shaking, the first drops of rain began to fall cold as tears against our hot skin. He said nothing more. He simply gave my hand one final desperate squeeze, turned, and disappeared into the gathering darkness, leaving me alone with the echo of his words and the taste of his kiss on my lips. He wanted to be the first and the last, and in that moment, I knew with a certainty that terrified me that he would be. The storm that broke that night was biblical, a furious deluge of rain and lightning that turned the streets of Redemption Gulch into rivers of mud. It felt as though the sky was weeping for what was to come. The next morning, Buck Malone, flanked by a dozen deputized men, all of them on Gus Ford's payroll, rode out toward the dragoons. Their faces were grim, their rifles held with a self-righteous certainty. They weren't coming to serve a warrant. They were going on a hunt. I was frantic. I paced the floor of our small house, my father watching me with pained eyes. I had to do something. The image of Rohn's face, the feel of his kiss, was burned into my mind. I couldn't let him die because of a lie. My first thought was to confront Gus Ford directly, but I knew it was useless. He held all the cards. I needed proof. I needed to unravel the lie he had so carefully woven. The charge was cattle rustling. Ford claimed a dozen head had been driven off his northern pasture, the tracks leading straight toward the mountains. It was too neat, too perfect. I put on my riding clothes, my mind racing. Where would the proof be? Ford wasn't a man who did his own dirty work. He would have used his men like Roy Dobson, but they would be loyal. I needed someone else, someone on the inside, but with a conscience. My mind snagged on a name, Cole Harlan. He was a young man, barely 20, who had come west seeking adventure, but had found only the dull reality of a corrupt town. I had set his arm once after a saloon brawl. He was quiet, watchful, and I had seen a flicker of shame in his eyes. More than once, when Buck Malone issued orders that clearly came straight from Ford. He was the weak link. I found him at the stables checking the shoes on his horse. He looked tired and conflicted. "Deputy," I said, my voice low and urgent. He looked up, startled. "Miss Hayes," he stammered, "you shouldn't be here. I know what Ford is doing," I said, cutting to the chase. "And I think you do too. Those cattle weren't rustled by Rohn." He looked away, his jaw tightening. "I don't know what you're talking about." "I have my orders," he mumbled. "Orders to kill innocent people." I pressed, stepping closer. "I know you're not like the others, Robert. You have a conscience. That cattle trail, it wouldn't just disappear. The storm would have washed it away. But before that, where did the cattle go?" He remained silent, his face a mask of conflict. "Gus Ford is a monster," I whispered. "But he's a clever monster. He wouldn't just kill the cattle to fake a crime. That's a waste of money. He would have moved them, hidden them somewhere. Am I wrong?" He finally met my gaze, and in his eyes I saw the truth. "He's trapped," he said, his voice barely audible. "Even if I knew, telling you would be a death sentence. Ford owns this town. Is your silence worth the lives of women and children?" I asked. "Because that's who Malone's posse will find in that canyon. Rohn won't let them take him without a fight, and everyone will pay the price." He wavered. I saw it. I pushed one last time. "Help me, Robert. Help me find the truth." He let out a long, shaky breath. "There's an old abandoned box canyon north of here," he said so quietly, I had to lean in to hear. "They call it Devil's Jaw. Ford uses it sometimes to hold stock off the books. Roy Dobson and a couple of others drove a small herd up there 2 nights ago." Just before the storm, he added, his voice heavy with dread. "It was the key. The proof. Thank you," I said, my heart soaring with a dangerous hope. But as I turned to leave, a new voice, oily and triumphant, stopped me dead in my tracks. Well, well, what do we have here? A conspiracy." Gus Ford stepped out of the shadows of the stables, a predatory smile twisting his face. Behind him stood Roy Dobson and another of his thugs. Deputy Harlan went pale as his face, a picture of pure terror. "It seems my deputy has a loose tongue," Ford purred, his eyes fixed on Harlan. "And my intended has a penchant for meddling." He took a step toward me. "Did you really think it would be that easy, Ruby? That you could unravel my plans with a few well-chosen words to a spineless boy?" My blood ran cold. He had heard everything. Roy Dobson, without looking away from me, said, "It appears Deputy Harlan has had a tragic accident. Resisted arrest while colluding with savages. A terrible loss for the town." He added, his smile chilling as it turned back to me. "And as for you, my dear, you're coming with me. We're going for a ride. I think it's time you saw what happens to those who defy me. You'll have a front row seat for the extermination." Roy Dobson drew his pistol and clubbed Deputy Harlan across the head. The young man crumpled to the ground without a sound. Before I could scream, Ford's other man grabbed me, his hand clamping over my mouth. "Don't fight it," Ruby Ford whispered in my ear, his voice venomous. "The game is over. I've won." As they dragged me toward a horse, my mind reeled. This wasn't just a frame-up. It was a purge. And Ford wasn't just going to destroy Rohn. He was going to make me watch. But as I looked at Ford's triumphant face, a sudden terrible realization dawned on me, a twist more horrifying than I could have imagined. I remembered Rohn's story about the raid that killed his family. It had happened 15 years ago, not far from here. It was what had driven the last of the Apache from the fertile lands in the valley, the very same valley that now formed the heart of Gus Ford's ranching empire. It wasn't just about cattle. It was never just about me. This was the final act of a crime that had begun a generation ago. Ford wasn't just getting rid of a rival. He was silencing the last living witness to his own bloody rise to power. The serpent wasn't just striking. He was devouring the last piece of his own tail. The ride to Devil's Jaw was a nightmare. I was tied and slung over a horse with Ford riding beside me, pontificating like a king surveying his domain. He was drunk on his own power, the victory so close he could taste it. And in his arrogance, he confessed everything. "It was a masterstroke, you know," he said, his voice gloating. 15 years ago, everyone thought it was just another Indian raid gone wrong. A settler family the Stantons wiped out. Tragic. But nobody asked who really benefited. He paused, looking at me for effect. That land had the only year-round spring in the valley. The Apaches knew it, the Stantons knew it, and I knew it. So I paid a few gunslingers, gave them some cheap whiskey and a good story. They did the rest. The army came, drove the last of the Apache into the mountains, and I bravely claimed the abandoned land. The foundation of my entire enterprise built on a lie and a little bit of blood. He let out a laugh. The raid that orphaned Rohn. I felt the horror of it settle deep in my bones. Ford laughed again. That's the part I didn't count on. One of them got away. A boy. Heard he was taken in by some priest. I never thought he'd be foolish enough to come back. When he showed up a year ago, silent and brooding, I knew. He didn't know I was responsible, of course. But his very existence was a loose end. And Gus Ford doesn't leave loose ends. His confession was chilling in its nonchalance. He had orchestrated the murder of Rohn's family, stolen his ancestral lands, and was now about to finish the job by slaughtering Rohn's people. My presence was just the convenient excuse he needed. We reached Devil's Jaw. It was a narrow, desolate canyon, and just as Deputy Harlan had said, a dozen head of cattle, with Ford's brand, were penned at the far end. This was the proof. But the proof was useless if we were all dead. Gus Ford's plan was simple and brutal. He would leave me here tied up with the cattle. Roy Dobson and his other man would ride out to join the posse, claiming they'd found the rustled herd and that the Apache had taken me hostage. The posse, inflamed and righteous, would storm Rohn's camp with no questions asked. In the ensuing battle, Rohn would be killed, his people scattered or slain, and I would be rescued by a grieving but heroic Gus Ford. He would be the hero who saved the town and the woman he loved, while his men tied my hands to a scrub oak. Ford leaned in close. "You see, Ruby, you will be mine," he said, his voice low, predatory. "One way or another, you'll learn to forget him. You'll learn to appreciate what I've done for you." He mounted his horse and rode off with his men, leaving me alone in the silent, imposing canyon. The silence was my only hope. Buck Malone's posse was still miles away, moving slowly through the rough terrain. Ford and his men were riding to meet them, but they had overlooked one thing: Deputy Harlan. I struggled against the ropes, my wrists already raw. It felt hopeless. Panic began to set in, and then I heard it. A single soft bird call. It was repeated twice. A signal Rohn had taught me, the call of a canyon wren. My heart leapt. I answered with a weak, wavering call. A moment later, he dropped down from a ledge above me as silently as a mountain lion. Rohn. His face was a thundercloud of fury and concern. He sliced through my ropes with a single fluid motion of his knife. "I followed you," he growled, his voice low. "I saw them take you." "Rohn, it's a trap," I said, rubbing my wrists. "The cattle are here. This is his proof. But there's more. So much more." I quickly told him everything Ford had confessed, the raid, his family, the stolen land. As I spoke, his face transformed. The fury was replaced by a chilling stillness. The look in his eyes wasn't of rage, but a deep, ancient grief hardening into a terrible resolve. He was no longer just fighting for his people. He was fighting for the ghosts of his past. "He will not reach the posse," Rohn said, his voice devoid of emotion, which was more terrifying than any shout. "This ends today." Here he pointed to the narrow entrance of the canyon. "Their path back to the posse will bring them through here again. This is where we make our stand." I asked, surprised. "You are part of this now, Ruby Hayes," he said, his eyes meeting mine. There was no backing out. What followed was a masterclass in guerrilla warfare. Rohn wasn't just a warrior, he was a tactician. He knew every rock, every shadow of this canyon. He had me help him roll boulders to the edge of the canyon walls, creating a potential rock slide. He found a narrow crevice for me to hide in, handing me the canteen of water from his own belt. "Do not make a sound until it's over," he commanded. Then he disappeared, melting into the rocks. The canyon was silent again, but now it hummed with deadly intent. An hour later, Ford and his 2 men rode back into the canyon's entrance, laughing. They were on their way to deliver the false news to the posse. They rode with the arrogance of men who believed they had already won. They never saw it coming. An arrow fired from an impossible angle high on the canyon wall took Roy Dobson's horse in the neck. The animal screamed and went down, throwing Roy to the ground. Before the others could react, Rohn dropped from a ledge behind them, landing as silently as a shadow. He dispatched the second man with brutal efficiency, his knife a blur of motion. The man was dead before he hit the ground. Ford, his face a mask of shock and terror, fumbled for his pistol. He fired a wild shot that ricocheted off the canyon wall, but Rohn was already moving, weaving through the rocks like a phantom. Ford fired again and again. Then Rohn let out a cry. It wasn't a scream of pain, but a raw primal war cry that echoed off the stone walls, a sound filled with the grief and rage of 15 years. He charged. He ignored the pistol in Ford's hand, closing the distance in 3 massive strides. He slammed into Ford, and the 2 men went down in a heap. It wasn't a fight. It was an execution. Rohn, fueled by a righteous fury, was an unstoppable force of nature. He avenged his mother, his father, his people with his bare hands. When it was over, Rohn stood breathing heavily, his body splattered with blood. Rohn looked down at the man who had stolen his past and tried to steal his future. Then he raised his gaze to the rocks, his eyes locking onto my hiding place. The echoes of the gunshots faded, leaving only the sound of the wind. The reckoning was complete, but a new problem was closing in. Buck Malone and a dozen armed men who'd heard the shots were now riding hard in our direction. The thunder of hooves grew louder, a drumbeat of impending doom. Rohn stood over Gus Ford's body, not as a victor, but as a man burdened by the violent catharsis he'd just unleashed. "They're coming," I said, scrambling down from my hiding place. "They'll see this and they won't ask questions. They'll kill you." He looked at me, his eyes dark with the horrors he'd just committed and the injustices he'd suffered. The fire of vengeance had cooled, leaving an exhausted, weary man. "Go," he said, his voice raspy. "Tell them Ford kidnapped you. Tell them I did this and fled. They'll hunt me, but you'll be safe." "No," I said, my voice resolute. I walked over to where Roy Dobson's pistol lay in the dust and picked it up. The metal was heavy and cold. "I am not leaving you. We end this together with the truth." Just then, another figure appeared at the canyon entrance. It was Deputy Harlan, his head bandaged with a strip of his own shirt. His face bruised but determined. He held a rifle in his hands. "Miss Hayes," he said, panting, I heard the shots." His eyes widened as he took in the carnage. "Harlan, thank God," I said quickly. "Ford confessed everything. He killed Rohn's family 15 years ago for this land. He framed him for the rustling. These cattle are the proof. He was going to have the posse slaughter Rohn's people." Harlan looked from me to Rohn, then to the bodies. The pieces clicked into place behind his fearful eyes. He had a choice to side with the dead devil he knew, or the living truth he feared. "The posse is minutes away," Harlan said, his voice shaking. "They'll shoot first and ask questions never." "Then we must give them a reason to ask," Rohn said. He walked over to the penned cattle and with a powerful slash of his knife, cut the ropes of the makeshift gate. He slapped the nearest steer on its rump, and the small herd, spooked and confused, began to thunder out of the canyon. "What are you doing?" I cried. creating confusion, he said. He grabbed my arm. Harlan, tell them the truth. You are their law now, your word against a dead man's. He looked at the young deputy, not with a threat, but with an appeal. Be the man you wanted to be when you pinned on that star. Without waiting for an answer, Rohn pulled me toward the back of the canyon where the walls were steep, but climbable for a man like him. Just as Buck Malone and the posse galloped into the canyon's entrance, they were met with the stampeding cattle. The ensuing chaos of shouting men and panicked horses gave us the cover we needed. Rohn practically threw me up the first series of ledges, his strength astonishing. We scrambled up the rock face, my lungs burning, my fingers raw. Below I could hear Malone restoring order, his voice bellowing questions. I heard Deputy Harlan's voice high-pitched but clear, trying to explain. We reached a high, narrow ledge, looking down on the scene below. We were exposed. A rifle shot pinged off the rock near my head. They've seen us. They won't stop hunting me, Rohn said, pulling me behind a rocky outcrop. As long as I am here, your life will be in danger. You must go back down. Tell Harlan's story. With Ford dead, they might listen. And what will you do? I asked, my heart breaking. He looked out at the vast, unforgiving wilderness that stretched to the horizon. I will do what my people have always done. I will survive. He turned to me and cupped my face in his hands. His hands were stained with dirt and blood, but his touch was as gentle as it had been by the mission ruins. He is dead, Ruby, he whispered. The ghost that haunted me is gone. But his world remains, and in his world, there's no place for us. We can make a place, I insisted, tears streaming down my face. We can go north to Canada or west to California, somewhere they don't know us. A sad smile touched his lips. Your heart is brave, but the world is large and its memory is long. A white woman and an Apache warrior. We were to be hunted for sport. He leaned in and kissed me. It wasn't like the first time, desperate and frantic. This kiss was something deeper. It was a kiss of profound love, mixed with unbearable sorrow. It was a kiss that sealed a promise and faced a bitter truth. It was a kiss of goodbye. You said you wanted to be the first man I kissed. I sobbed against his chest. He held me tight, his chin resting on the top of my head. And the last man you love. He finished, his voice thick with emotion. Letting you go is my proof of that. Your life is worth more than my happiness. Another shot rang out, closer this time. Go! He urged, gently pushing me away. Live, Ruby Hayes, live a long life. Live enough for both of us. He gave me one last searing look, a look I would carry with me for the rest of my days. Then he turned and began to climb, moving up the sheer rock face with an agility that defied belief. He didn't look back. I stood on that ledge watching him go until he was just a speck against the infinite sky, a giant swallowed by the vastness of his own land. Below, the shouting had stopped. Deputy Harlan had convinced them to hold their fire. I made my choice. I took a deep breath and began my slow, careful climb, back down, back to the world of men, leaving my heart on a mountain ledge with the last man I would ever truly love. And so the official story was written. Deputy Cole Harlan, a hero, uncovered Gus Ford's treachery. Ford resisted arrest and was killed. The Apache Rohn, accused of kidnapping me, had fled into the mountains, a fugitive from a justice he didn't trust. I corroborated the story. My father and I left Redemption Gulch a month later, seeking a gentler climate in California. But that's just the story they tell. The real story, the one I've shared with you, lives on, not in history books, but in the echoes of the heart. The story of Rohn and Ruby is a testament to a love that dared to exist in a world determined to destroy it. It reminds us that sometimes the greatest acts of love aren't about holding on, but about letting go. The Wild West was full of legends, but the truest stories are the ones whispered on the wind, stories of courage, sacrifice, and a love that was as vast and untamable as the land itself. If their story touched you, please give this video a thumbs up. Share it with someone who appreciates tales of the forgotten West, and subscribe for more stories that bring history to life. What do you think happened to Rohn? Let me know in the comments below. All stories are created for entertainment purposes and may include fictional elements or dramatized interpretations inspired by historical settings. We use AI tools, voiceover visuals, scripts as creative assistants. However, all content is reviewed, refined, and edited by humans to ensure emotional authenticity and storytelling quality. We fully comply with YouTube's policies regarding AI-generated content and do not use any deepfake techniques or misleading recreations of real individuals. All visuals and supporting materials are properly licensed. Sharing, re-uploading, modifying, or distributing any part of this content in any form requires written permission. We appreciate your support and respect for original creative work